3, 2, 1. Okay, we are here with Tom Long. He is from Nerds from Humanity. You might have seen me on his program as of last week. By the time this is recorded, it might be a little bit more than that. But Tom, it's great to have you back on the program. It's been so long since you've been here at the Hill of Roses.
Good afternoon, Rosebuds. It's always a pleasure to be on your show, John. I still have fond memories of the first time, and hopefully we'll continue many conversations in the future, but for sure the next 16 days is going to be wild and crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think the first thing I wanted to talk about with you, because we didn't get to talk about this during the debate that I had you on, or the first time when we were talking about top priorities, is kind of like the background for how Nerds for Humanity came to be, Nerds for Yang originally. What made you identify and want to build a movement around the nerd? How do you define nerdiness, and why did you want to champion that kind of movement?
Well, the channel started out, interestingly enough, a couple weeks before I first discovered Yang through the Rogan podcast. I was having a long conversation with a friend about the state of the country and how we got to where we are with Trump being in the White House. And one of the themes of our conversation was that for too long, in my opinion, the Democratic Party has kind of given the same prescription since basically the first Clinton administration. And, it was always like, okay, cheaper college, middle-class tax breaks, that kind of thing. And, one of the hypotheses was like, well, a lot of these voters for Trump, they basically know that that's kind of like maybe necessary, but definitely not sufficient. And they're fed up, and they wanted something completely different. So they know. And I think the other thing that came to mind was how, if you look at economic trends, that group is going to get more and more left behind. And, you just see more and more wealth going to a smaller pocket of the population. So if I were in their shoes, like, why wouldn't I take a chance on this kind of brash, maverick businessman, right? And one of the things that we talked about was how more people going to college may not solve these problems. They're not suddenly going to become an AI engineer for Facebook. Like that's a hard job to get. And, and if you get it, those guys they name their price, but not everyone's on track for that. And we're not in sort of post World War II era where everybody gets like a great middle-class job, even without a college degree. And those days are over. And so it was a week later that I heard the Rogan podcast. I heard Yang talk about it. I thought, oh, this is great. This is exactly what we were talking about. He must be some kind of book author. And then later in the interview, I guess it came up that he was running for president. I was like, no way, So I mean,
you're right, though. He was an author as well, but yeah,
true.
He was so much more.
True. So then I was like, what? And then, of course, I have to be upfront, like seeing an Asian American on the forefront on a public policy issue was refreshing to me. And as like a second generation American with now third generation Asian American kids, like that was important to me to see some representation. So I decided as a political junkie to start, the Nerds for Yang YouTube channel. And for several months, like each video may have gotten like 20 or 30 views. And then it started to get more traction, and we've kept it up since. Now, as for the Nerds thing, that was a little bit of a tongue in cheek, like sort of like this, it was a bit of a response to Trump, because Trump is the anti-nerd. He's not about
kind of that classic bully. Yeah, I can kind of see what you're going for here.
Right?
Yeah.
He is. He's this kind of a dick, And so like I mean, he literally or apparently paid people to take his SATs for him. And I remember people when I was in high school offering me to do take problem sets and
Oh,
homework for them.
dude reminds us all of Biff from, Back to the
That's
Future.
right.
We got ourselves our Marty McFly, the
Yeah.
nerd, or what was his? George McFly. That's his dad. Yeah,
Yeah.
we got that classic nerd bully dynamic. And
Yeah.
hell, if you see the second one, it basically seems like it is Trump that they're trying to emulate in that movie.
Seriously. So the whole Nerds for Yang thing was like, hey, why don't we celebrate people who try and think through a problem and all of its complexity and really have a respect for precision of thinking and consistency and logic and aligning things with reality and looking at data to make hard decisions, because like we would do that in any normal business. Like, why shouldn't we do that for our government? So that's how the Nerds for Yang channel started. And then of course we had to rebrand after Andrew suspended. But I've been having a blast. It's always fun talking about politics. I love policy and politics, so it's not.
Yeah, I can so relate to that. We love those dynamics here as well. We're definitely nerds ourselves as well. But I think you alluded to the best point. You kind of were following the data on why Trump was able to be victorious, and you were trying to have it be this reflection off of kind of Trump. And this connected with the Yang campaign, because I would say Andrew would even call himself a nerd, right?
Oh, yeah.
He's definitely a data-focused individual. And I think one of the things I'd love to hear from you is, when we follow the data, what are the metrics we are trying to achieve better scores in? One of the things like Yang championed in his campaign was this idea of an American scorecard. And I'd love to hear, in your opinion, what do you think are some of those metrics that we do need to be focusing in on and saying these are valuable metrics compared to some metrics that are used today that you might not find as valuable?
Yeah. I'll start with what I don't think is super valuable. I think like the NASDAQ and Dow are useful metrics, but they don't really reflect the prospects of the everyday man. Of course, you don't want a crashing stock market, but just because the market's doing really well, it just means that the companies have a good prospects relative to what they used to have. It doesn't mean that they necessarily are going to hire more people or pay their people more money. In many ways, the motivations for capital is that it wants to go to the most efficient organizations, which generally have lower labor costs, right? So I think the president likes to talk about NASDAQ and Dow because I think in the 80s, that was like kind of like everybody always assumed that, well, when a company's doing better, they're going to hire more people and everybody's going to benefit. But I think that's becoming less and less true. In terms of what I would recommend, I do agree with a lot of what Yang was talking about. If I had to name 3 or 4 metrics, one would be asking parents, do you feel like your kids have a brighter future or more opportunity than you do? That's a harder metric. It's obviously like a qualitative, it's a kind of like optimism metric. But if that's a metric is going in the wrong direction, fundamentally something's not working. On top of that, I would certainly look at not just median income, but probably the bottom 10 percentile income, because you could have a situation where the median is doing fine, but that sort of bottom 10% or bottom quintile is doing worse. And I'm not just trying to be a bleeding heart liberal here, but at some point, like for society to be stable, there's only so much that bottom quintile is going to put up with before they say, burn this whole system down. Like this is all BS. And they start, kind of just saying like the whole thing is broken.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're wealthy and you are fortunate, like you actually have an interest in making sure that everybody's doing well enough that they're not gonna burn the stadium down. Like you can run up the points as much as you want, but if the other team starts to like clear the bench and attack you, like that's not in no one's interest. So bottom 10% income, median income, life expectancy, probably like you could talk about cleanliness of air and water, but I think that will actually show up in some of the health life expectancy stuff. Those would be some, so if I had to maybe give three, it would be, do you feel like your kids have as many or more opportunities than you did? Are the bottom 10% medium and median income, are they going up? And then maybe something around health, like infant mortality, again, for the bottom 10%. Like there's no question that if you have resources, you can get the best healthcare. I mean, look at President Trump. He recovered great from COVID. He also had like literally a team of doctors around the clock.
Yeah, I don't think
You
everyone
know,
gets a helicopter to take them to a
no.
hospital. Yeah, so he had top tier quality care. I think
And he got Regeneron. Nobody else has access to that. He got remdesivir. That's a $5,000
nice
treatment.
experimental cocktail.
Yeah. So I think in general, the scorecard needs to look at how the whole team is doing and how, frankly, the least fortunate are doing. And otherwise, you could end up in a world where that separation becomes unsustainable.
Yeah, no, I think that's a strong point. So I think that turns to the second point, which is obviously we now kind of understand the data metrics that we're using to evaluate how good of a job we're trying to progress as society. What do you think is going to be required incentive wise to achieve improvement in those key metrics? Because I think right now, at least it seems like Andrew Yang has started to say, okay, we have a democracy right now that is not representing the needs of the people and this human factor. They're using these traditional metrics. What do you think is going to be needed to incentivize these politicians to kind of see the data more than the politics? Because I think people right now are on these partisan lines of just pure politics
Yeah.
compared to saying, what's the best solution to the present problem? What do you think is going to be needed incentive wise to start changing these dynamics at all?
That's the thing that keeps me up a lot at night, because these metrics have been around. They're not like secrets. Like we've known income inequality has been an issue. We know for a fact that health is declining. And so the question is like, why aren't politicians and voters paying attention? And I think the fundamental root cause there is that voters and Americans, like, we haven't been trained to be data driven. So I'll give you an example. If I'm in a debate with a MAGA person about Trump versus Biden, they will bring up all kinds of stuff like, oh, did you know that Hunter said this in some text message? Or did you know that what happened to Hillary's emails?
Mm.
But rarely will they show me data. Even when they talk about, oh, record low unemployment, and then I show them the chart that says, well, actually unemployment had been going down since 2009 when there was a different guy in the White House. And that's just like it's not part of the dialogue. It's not. It's sort of like two people arguing over football, but not looking at the stats, and just saying like, oh well, the Patriots always deflated the ball or whatever.
Yeah, it's
But
anecdotal to its core of how people argue. Because I think even Yang has himself admitted to this. People connect more with this storytelling element because it's easier for us in our minds to imagine a scenario. It's very illustrative in terms of, we can actually visually see it. When you just give someone a statistic, you're saying, okay, this might be a problem, but we're making you do all the work to do the imagining of how does that situation come to exist. And I think that's certainly a very important element of kind of leadership is how do we communicate these values in terms of your mind, we've obviously talked on many occasions about the importance of competency and leadership. Could
Mhm.
you basically reiterate for some of the folks out there what you think are some of the key attributes of leadership, of why you think Trump has been such a poor leader in mismanaging this crisis is right now?
Yeah, there's a few things that I would look for that I feel like I haven't seen in the Trump administration. I think the first is the ability to break down complex problems and identify root causes, and then develop plans and strategies that are measurable that address those root causes. And anybody listening to this that works in a normal company, like, this is very common. This is what managers do.
Yeah.
And but yet we have a president. Like, take the COVID thing for example. Like, he keeps talking about banning flights from China in January. The reality was that the virus was already in the country by January. Some people think like November, December. Not to mention there were flights coming in from Europe, and then the fact that American citizens traveling from China were allowed to come in, and there was no additional testing required of them. Like, that requires understanding the root cause of the problem, which is, oh shoot, we have a virus in our country. It is now spreading. The goal should be to reduce that spread and to make sure there's sufficient treatment capacity. So blocking flights from China might be necessary, but isn't sufficient. And we just don't have a leader in the White House who I think is able to have, honestly, boring 5-point plans that are measurable, that have milestones, that require complex execution and alignment of activities. So that's number one. It's like, in my opinion, you want a leader that can get to the root of a problem and then execute on a plan to address it. The second thing is, in my opinion, you want a leader that can attract and retain talent, like very capable people. Now, I may not have agreed with them, but I did think that like Gary Cohn, Kelly, McMaster, these are very accomplished people. They're all gone. I mean, they all. I know Trump says that he fired them.
Getting books,
right? Yeah, and I know Trump says they're all losers, and he fired them, and they didn't leave him. But whatever, they're not there anymore. And the people that he has still around him, like if you exclude next of kin, these are not the best and brightest in the country. And then if you include next of kin, they're definitely probably they're just definitely not up to the task. So team would be the second one. And then I think the third thing is overlooked, which is trust. Like, if we can't look over his shoulder, and if we're not in the room where they're making these big decisions, then we need to trust that this guy's going to do the right thing. And he's going to put, I used to be a Republican. We used to talk about country first. You would want a leader that would put the interests of the country in advance of your family's interests or your personal interests or your pride. So on all three counts, I would score Donald Trump like an F. Now some people out there are going to say, "Oh, about Biden, he's no racehorse." He may not be like a straight A on all three of those things, but if you talk about like, does he have plans that address a problem? If I look at the Joe Biden website and I look at the climate plan, the health plan, the tax plan, I may not agree with everything there, but there's a plan.
Yeah.
You go to the Donald Trump website and see if you can find a plan. There's none. Because I don't think he has the ability to focus, and he doesn't care.
There's certainly slogans, but there's certainly plans. Like when you look at the level of detail of Joe Biden's plans, I largely agree with a lot of his common goals. I don't think he goes far enough on certain things. But yeah, he has certainly a plan that tries to address the root issue. There are a couple issues where I obviously disagree with him still, but I think people, underestimate his policy competency. It might not be him himself, but as he said, it's an administration, it's managing a plan. And if policy wonks are putting that on his website, well, that's what he's going to be probably pushing for at the
Yeah.
end of the day. So I think people don't give him enough credit. And I think the last question I want to ask you in this part before we get to some fan questions in our second part and really test the nerdiness of the movement that you're
Oh
building
boy.
here. The last question is like movement management. There's certainly been a lot of talk back and forth on, how do we move the ball on these key issues of democracy reform, of, having an economic alignment of, direct payments to people and getting these correct measurements in. And they see Biden as someone who is likely going to have, a successor in Kamala Harris in 2024. What do you see as that path? Like if you were trying to sell the Yang Gang on a project plan of how do we grow this movement, what are some of those key milestones that you want us to aim at and focus at?
So the first would be, let's make sure we have a White House that at least is going to be open to new innovative ideas. And obviously, I don't think that Trump would fit that bill. The second thing would be, once we get Biden into the White House, would be getting Yang in a senior role in the cabinet, or at least getting him an offer. And then he can decide if he wants to take it. And then I think the third thing would be pushing hard on congressional candidates in winnable districts, or pushing hard on state propositions around RCV, or maybe some UBI pilots. I think all three of those things are totally achievable, but they're also not overnight wins. And this is going to be potentially our life's work, like this stuff like that we want. If you read Yang's proposals, like that's a lot of stuff that he wanted to do that we all agreed with. And so I do think we need to kind of brace ourselves for a marathon. And I think I've noticed that there are some folks who are really bummed. Of course I was too when he's suspended, but the fact that he got on CNN and raised his profile, and the fact that he's now campaigning for Biden and is basically a surrogate, and maybe he gets offered a senior cabinet role, that's huge. That is huge, because I do believe Biden likes Yang, and I believe he respects him, and I believe that Yang can be very persuasive. So if you imagine like Yang in the Oval with Biden and sort of the inner circle, how would that not be a good thing relative to Trump hanging out with Jared and Ivanka and Barr and McEnany and that whole like pack of hyenas?
Yeah, I think fundamentally it comes down to just, do you want to go in the correct direction, but not far enough, and maybe not in the right, solution that you want, but it's trying to address the same problems? Or do you want to go in the opposite direction and just have these things go to these special interest groups? Now, I'm not going to deny Joe Biden's going to be someone we're going to have to move. As you said, he's not perfect yet, but he's shown to be, in my opinion, a very adaptable politician over time. He has constantly tried to follow where the movement is. And we've been, in my opinion, doing great work on the local levels pushing for UBI. We've had so many pilot programs, and I think that's really a good measure of, we have a lot of work to do, but we're at the start of a successful movement. So, Tom, I think this is a great point for us to take a break and come back and have a little fun with some nerdy questions to get to know you a little bit more, because I've always loved when you do the Ask Me Anything. So I collected a lot of nerdy Ask Me Anythings for you. So everyone stick tuned. We'll be back with Tom to answer some of your questions. Thank you so much for watching today's episode of The Hill of Roses. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you did, please let us know by subscribing to our channel, liking today's video, and sharing the video with your friends. Also, if you want to be notified, please make sure you hit the bell when you subscribe. Finally, if you want to find more of our network's content, please go to thehillofroses.com. With that being said, we love y'all for helping the movement grow, and we hope you're staying rosy out there.